There is something I've come to understand about people who are genuinely obsessed with changing their lives. They pay attention. They pay attention to numbers. They pay attention to patterns. They pay attention to themselves. Because you can desperately want to change something, but until you understand it, you may not know how to change it. And sometimes I think that is the problem that we have. We don't lack the desire for change. We lack the willingness to study what we are trying to change. Think about a habit you have been trying to break for many years. You keep telling yourself, I need to stop this. I need to become better. This time will be different. And maybe you have told yourself that for 100 times. But what if the problem is not that you do not want to change? What if you have never actually studied the behavior? Imagine you keep losing control of yourself every Friday. Maybe you drink, maybe you spend money you shouldn't spend, maybe you waste your entire weekend. Maybe you fall back into a habit you have promised yourself you would leave behind. And every Saturday, you wake up disappointed. Then Monday comes, you feel motivated again. You say to yourself, this week will be different. But Friday comes again, and it happens again. At some point, you have to stop simply condemning yourself and start asking yourself questions. Why Friday? What happened on Thursday? You need to pay attention to what happened on Thursday. What were you feeling? Who were you around? What were you consuming? What conversations did you have? What happened before the behavior? Because perhaps what happens on Friday did not begin on Friday. Friday may simply be where everything you failed to notice throughout the week finally becomes visible. This is why people who genuinely want to improve themselves become so obsessed with patterns. They ask questions. When am I most productive? When do I usually procrastinate? What happens before I lose my temper? What usually happens before I give up? What are the things that make me spend money unnecessarily? What kind of environment brings out the worst in me? These people are not just experiencing their lives, they are studying their lives. Because your life may be telling you the truth through repetition. You may keep saying to yourself, maybe I'm just lazy. But perhaps you are not lazy. Perhaps you consistently lose energy after sleeping poorly. Perhaps you procrastinate whenever a task feels ambiguous. Or you may become emotionally unstable when you have been isolated for too long. There's a possibility you do not have a motivation problem. Probably you have a pattern recognition problem. And this matters a lot because what you do not measure, you cannot understand. And only what can be understood can eventually be changed. But there's a problem. We live in a world that is constantly fighting for your attention. Your phone wants your attention. Social media wants your attention. Entertainment wants your attention. Advertising wants your attention. Everybody wants a piece of your mind. And if you have not learned how to command your attention, you will struggle to command your life because transformation requires that you sit down with something long enough to understand it. You cannot constantly distract yourself and expect to deeply understand yourself. You need moments where you can actually observe. Why did I react that way? Why do I keep doing this? What was I feeding myself before I did this? What keeps triggering this emotion in me? Sometimes the most important thing you can do for your life is simply pay attention. If you genuinely want to improve your life, start collecting evidence. Track your spending, track your time, track your habits, track your emotions, track your failures, track your victories, track the days when you are most productive, track the days when you fall apart, track when you tend to procrastinate, Track the times when you lose your temper. Track what happens before you give up. Not because your life needs to become a spreadsheet, but because your patterns become much harder to ignore when you can see them. Sometimes you think you are having a random bad week. Then you look at the last 3 months of your life and you realize, wait, this happens every time. That's the moment something changes in your life. Because once you can see the pattern, you can interrupt it. And once you interrupt it enough time, you can now create a new pattern. We often think transformation begins with motivation, a powerful speech we heard online, probably a new year, a sudden realization, a moment where we can say, I'm changing my life. But I don't think that's where transformation really begins. It begins with awareness. The Bible says something. It says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And renewal requires awareness. You cannot renew what you refuse to examine. You cannot change what you refuse to look at. And you cannot conquer a pattern you have never taken the time to recognize. So maybe the question you need to ask yourself isn't simply, what do I need to change? Maybe you should start asking yourself this very important question: what do I need to start paying attention to? Because your life is leaving clues everywhere, in your spending, in your relationships, in your emotions, in your habits, in your failures, in the things that keep repeating itself. And perhaps the life you are praying for is not so far from you as you think it is. Perhaps the first step is not to become somebody completely different. Maybe the first step is to become attentive enough to finally understand the person you already are, because you cannot change what you refuse to look at.